I married the woman I thought I'd grow old with, and found myself staring down a knife held by the man she told me not to worry about. I've been sitting here trying to figure out the best place to begin this story, and I keep coming back to that one Friday evening in April. Things might jump around a bit as I give you some context, but bear with me. Let's just start there. Friday late afternoon, a little past 5 p.m. I had just wrapped up my work week and stepped out into one of those rare spring days in Oregon where the weather seems to forget it's usually gray. It was perfect, almost 70 degrees, clear skies, sun warming everything it touched. I should have felt great. Week's over, the weekend ahead, weather on my side. But that's when the good mood started slipping away. As I pulled into my driveway, it hit me, I had no plans. No dates lined up, no social gatherings. Just nothing. At that point in my life I was 28. Been divorced for about 3 years. I wasn't seeing anyone, though not for lack of trying. I had dipped my toes into the online dating pool, but honestly, it just felt like flushing money down the drain. Most of my friends had already settled down, and the few blind dates they tried to set me up on were absolute train wrecks. To top it off, my ex-wife, Kimberly, was now in a steady relationship with, of all people, probably the woman I was closest to outside of family. Funny how life spins you around like that. And yeah, I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't sneak in, what's wrong with me? I parked the car and just sat there a minute, feeling that quiet loneliness settle in. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Mike. Now, Mike and I go way back. He's one of the few guys I still talk to regularly. He's got this charmed life, barely works, always has cash somehow, and his wife, Megan? Total catch. Beautiful, sharp, and just the right kind of sarcastic to keep Mike's oversized ego in check. He asked what I had going on for the weekend, and even though I had absolutely nothing lined up, I half lied and told him I was pretty booked, but might have some flexibility. He laughed. Don't tell me your old man's got you working Saturdays now. Some backstory here. Mike's dad, Ted Robinson, owns the company I work at, a specialty timber outfit. Ted's also my boss. Kimberly, my ex, works there too, she handles the accounting. Oh, and just to twist the knife a little deeper, she's also Mike's sister. Small world, huh? Anyway, Mike kept talking and suddenly he goes, "Be at the office tomorrow. 3:30, wear work clothes." Just like that. I didn't even know what to say. I stood up, shook his hand, still kind of stunned, and left. As I was walking out, I caught a glimpse of this tall, balding guy peeking out of the last office down the hall, just watching me. At the time, it didn't mean anything. But I'd later realized that moment marked the beginning of a new chapter one never saw coming. So, back to that Friday night. I was on my deck, talking with Mike again, and I finally admitted I wasn't working that weekend. Just had some errands to check off. Truthfully, it was all just filler. Saturday rolled around and the day was mostly uneventful. I had my usual break at 10 a.m., a half-hour lunch at noon, and was expecting to be out of there by 3:30. When 10 o'clock hit, Smitty, the guy in charge of scheduling, sent me to the break room. Oddly enough, I'd never even been to that side of the building before. It was tucked away past the main offices, right near the women's restroom. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and that's when I saw him. This preppy little guy was already sitting there, leaning back with a smug grin on his face, like he'd been waiting for me. I had no idea in that moment just how tangled this story was about to get. Maybe it was the way I was dressed that caught their attention that day. I had on a pair of worn-out overalls, an old hand-me-down from Smitty himself, still bearing some faint company stains from past jobs. As I walked in, Smitty looked up and chuckled, "Tyler, you're gonna cause an energy crisis wearing that thing." We walked over to the booths and that's when I saw her, Megan, Mike's wife. Blonde, absolutely stunning, and always with that easygoing, warm smile that made her feel like someone you'd known forever. She greeted Mike with a kiss on the cheek and then turned to introduce me. "Tyler, this is Brandy and Celia." Brandy was striking in a bold kind of way, long straight dark hair, sharp features, and a figure that was hard to ignore. She had a confident stance and a bit of a hardened edge to her. Her top dipped just enough to distract me during the handshake, and I had to remind myself to keep my eyes where they belonged. Then there was Celia. Celia had this quiet energy about her. Athletic build, thick curly hair that framed her face perfectly, and eyes that met mine with a spark. She held my gaze, smiled, and said, "Nice to finally meet you, Tyler. I've heard a bit about you." The way she said it, there was something playful in her tone. I found myself grinning back before I even realized it. Without thinking too much, I told her I'd pick her up around 9 the next morning for the trail run at Ann Ridge. She nodded, still smiling. On the drive home, I could feel the weight of Mike and Megan's glance from the front seat. I caught Mike's smirk in the rearview mirror. "What?" I asked. They just exchanged this look and laughed. "So she's cool." What do you want me to say? I added, trying to play it off. Mike grinned wider. Ever since Kim and I split up, he's been on this quiet mission to get me back in the dating game. I think part of him still feels guilty about how things ended, maybe because she's his sister. Maybe because, deep down, he always suspected what she hadn't told me. At that point in my life, everything felt like it was stuck in limbo. I'd been working at Specialty Timbers without any real direction. I had an application to Lane Community College sitting untouched on my dresser, but even with community college being relatively affordable, I couldn't swing the cost. And then Ted, Mike's dad, started pulling me aside more often. His health had taken a turn. Turned out he was battling cancer and only came in a few days a week now. That wasn't going to last long. "Tyler," he said one afternoon, his voice quieter than usual, "you know the shop inside and out. Customers like you. And I need someone younger in this place to keep things moving. I'm thinking of putting you between the office and the floor. Work with Smitty when needed, but mostly keep things running up front." That offer caught me off guard. I hadn't expected anything serious to come from this job, and suddenly, it felt like maybe there was something solid waiting for me. As for Celia, well, we went on that run the next morning just like we planned. She told me about her life. Originally from the Bay Area, worked as a dental hygienist. Her dad, who passed a few years back, had worked for the railroad. Her mom, who was Italian, ran a small salon with her sister. "That's where the curls come from," she said, running a hand through her dark hair, laughing. "Straight from Nana's side of the family." We talked the entire run. Didn't feel like small talk either, it was real easy. Before I knew it, we'd finished the whole femme loop and were back at the car by 10:30. It was nice. Just uncomplicated and genuine. I didn't know where it was heading, but for the first time in a while, I didn't feel stuck. I felt like maybe something was starting. Honestly, I could have kept running for another 5 miles with Celia. The conversation was just that easy and I didn't want it to end. After we wrapped up the trail, I suggested grabbing a coffee, and we headed over to this little cafe nearby. It was quiet, cozy, the kind of place you don't feel rushed. While we were sitting there, I glanced down at my phone and saw a message pop up. My first thought was, what now? But to my surprise, and I'll admit my delight, it was from Celia. Just a quick checking-in text, but it made my whole mood shift. We ended up texting back and forth for over an hour while still sitting there. It all felt so natural. Easy. Like we were on the same wavelength without trying too hard. I know it hadn't even been a full week since we met, but man, it had been a long time since I felt this kind of excitement about someone. By Wednesday night, I couldn't help myself. I sent her a quick text just to see how she was doing. She replied right away and we had another great conversation. The following night, Thursday, she actually messaged me first. We ended up chatting for a while, this time talking more about our plans for the weekend. But something was a little off. She was still kind, still affectionate in her way, but the spark I had felt in our earlier messages wasn't quite there. When I asked how her day had been, she said she was just tired. Said it had been a long week. I tried to ask more about it, but before I could dig deeper, she shifted the topic to our upcoming hike. She didn't offer anything else about why the week had been so rough. And I didn't push. The hike itself was great though. When the trail widened out, we walked side by side and she reached over and held my hand. That simple gesture, her fingers wrapped in mine, felt like something I hadn't known I'd missed so much. That kind of closeness, it sticks with you when you've been without it. The plan was simple. Drop her off afterwards so she could relax at home. But on the way, she got a text and asked if we could make a quick stop to meet up with a few friends. I didn't mind. I figured why not? She mentioned a music spot called Evolution. I'd heard of it, never been, and said they were hanging out nearby. We pulled up and met the group. A bunch of laid-back guys, all friendly enough. But something about the way they interacted with her, it didn't sit right. There was a certain familiarity, especially between Celia and this one guy named Marcus. The way they talked, the body language, it felt intimate in a way that made me uneasy. And I hate to admit it, but I felt all the warmth and good vibes of the evening start to fade. She seemed totally at ease with them, maybe even a little too comfortable. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was just being sensitive. But the hugs, the casual little touches, it was hard to ignore. Eventually, we wrapped things up with everyone exchanging goodbyes, light hugs, a couple cheek kisses, and I was standing there trying not to overthink any of it. Later, I brought it up, probably more clumsily than I meant to. I may have sounded a little possessive. She didn't yell or raise her voice. Instead, she stepped in close, grabbed the front of my shirt, looked me dead in the eye, and said in a tone I hadn't heard from her before, "I told you there are no other guys. Leave it alone." Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant. And just like that, I was left standing there, unsure of what to feel. For the most part, things between us were good. Really good even. I had started to let myself imagine a future with her. Something steady. Something real. I'd even entertained the idea of working side by side with her at Specialty Timbers, building something meaningful together. It felt like a dream that might actually come true. Ted, Mike's dad, had become a kind of mentor to me. I was learning more from him than I ever expected. About work, sure, but also about life, about leadership, about building something lasting. Looking back now, I remember how he once smiled at me and said, "You two make sense. It's a good thing." That Christmas, Celia and I got married. At the time, it felt like the beginning of something solid. Like maybe I'd finally gotten it right. I was honestly over the moon at the time. Ted seemed truly happy for us, and looking back now, I'd say Kimberly was content. Not exactly thrilled, not unhappy either, just somewhere in the middle. But I didn't notice it then. I was so wrapped up in the dream I'd built in my head, the woman, the job, the family I never had. It all felt like a life finally falling into place. And for a while it really was. Kimberly and I worked side by side at Specialty Timbers. Business was steady and I was learning more than I ever thought I would. My bond with Ted deepened in ways I never expected. It felt like having a father figure for the first time in my life. Even my relationship with Mike improved. The whole thing just worked. But then everything shifted. The breakup, when it came, hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was like losing my job, my identity, and the people I considered family all in one sweep. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd tied my sense of stability to Kimberly, and through her, to her dad, her brother, the business, everything. For 3 straight days I barely moved from the couch. The grief was raw, overwhelming, and dark. My thoughts went to places I'm not proud of, places I never imagined I'd find myself in. I truly didn't know if I could keep going. Then Mike showed up. He just walked in like he always used to. At first he talked while I barely responded. Then we talked together. And finally he just listened. I remember him pulling out his phone without saying a word and making a quick call. Less than 30 minutes later, Ted walked through my front door. He sat down next to me, rested a hand on my shoulder, and said something that I still think about. "No matter what happens, Tyler, you've got a place at Specialty. You've got a home with us." That moment? It pulled me back from the edge. Later that same afternoon, when I finally got around to checking my phone, I saw 2 texts. One was from Kimberly, just checking in, short, polite, distant. The other was from Celia. "Randy and I are enjoying the sunshine and some coffee. Thanks for last night." I read it twice. At first I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. Was I overreacting? Being jealous? But something about the tone, and the way she mentioned another guy so casually, made my stomach knot up. I told myself I needed to think clearly, not react impulsively. So I replied with a safe, non-committal message. "Glad you're having a good time." That was it. Monday rolled around and she messaged again that evening, asked how my day had gone. I waited a few hours before replying. We were still texting regularly, a few times a week, sometimes talking on the phone. But I kept my guard up. Then one night I gave in to a weak moment. I agreed to go to Evolution with her on Friday. Now, dancing's not really my thing, but I can hold my own. Still, I had this feeling like I didn't belong there. Evolution was the new hot spot in Old Town, some trendy warehouse-turned club I'd heard about but never had any interest in visiting. But Celia? She was pumped. So excited, actually, that I let myself get caught up in her energy. And I reminded myself, relationships need compromise now and then. This, I figured, was one of those times. The place was packed when we got there. Lights flashing, music pounding, bodies everywhere. She was already moving with the rhythm before I even took off my jacket. And for the first half hour or so I tried. I danced. I laughed. I kept up. But eventually I needed a break. I made my way to the bar and grabbed us both a drink. Walked back to the table. Checked my watch, just after 11. I was ready to leave and I kept looking toward the dance floor, waiting for her to come back. And then I saw her, finally, laughing, her whole face lit up. She wasn't alone. Marcus was right behind her, grinning like he belonged there. And just like that, all the air went out of the night. She came back from the dance floor with sweat on her brow, smiling, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. Her skin was warm and flushed. She grabbed the drink I'd been holding for her, took a small sip. Then, out of nowhere, Marcus reached over, took the glass from her hand, and downed the rest like it belonged to him. Celia just laughed. "Come on, let's dance," she said, grabbing my hand. I pulled it back gently. "Nah, I'm good." I couldn't shake the weird vibe. I stood there, pretending to be fine, but my gut told a different story. Later that night, after I got home, I got a message from her. "Hey you. I miss talking to you. Call me. I stared at the screen for a bit before replying. Sorry, a lot going on. Let's connect tomorrow. She responded quickly with a simple, okay. But tomorrow came and I couldn't bring myself to follow up. Tuesday night passed in silence. I still couldn't bring myself to reach out. I didn't know what to say, or if I even wanted to say anything. The whole thing felt like it had shifted. Like we had turned a corner and couldn't go back. Then Wednesday evening rolled around. I got home from work a little after 6 and there it was, her black Volkswagen parked right out front. My stomach sank. Time to face the music, I thought. She was sitting on my back deck when I stepped outside, arms folded, waiting. What's the deal? Are you dumping me? She asked, clearly frustrated. I took a breath and sat across from her. Celia, there's just been some distance lately. You feel it too. And she didn't say anything for a while. Just looked down, then off into the trees like maybe she was trying to figure out if she did feel it, or just didn't want to admit it. After the new year, work had ramped up big time. Specialty Timbers was booming. We'd started pushing into Northern California and up around Puget Sound. The construction wave hit hard and our products were suddenly flying out the door. Ted pulled me aside earlier that week and asked if I could meet him Thursday evening. Sure, I said. What's going on? We'll talk, was all he offered. By the time Thursday came around, the day had gotten away from me. It was past 5 o'clock when I finally walked into Ted's office. Something about the way he had everything set up made me feel like I was being called in for something serious. Turns out it was. He told me he'd be heading to Denver within 2 weeks, and he needed someone to step up. The way he talked, I could tell this wasn't just a temporary assignment, it was a test. Thankfully, I knew the products. I understood the clients. And when I got to Denver, we hit the ground running. Orders started coming in fast. I hadn't even fully settled in before I checked my account that March and noticed an extra $1,500 in my deposit. I called Kimberly to ask if payroll had made a mistake. Nope, she said. That's your commission. 3% of gross. Didn't Ted tell you? He hadn't. But once I did the math and realized I could probably pull in $500,000 in sales that year, it hit me, that's 15 grand in commission alone. It felt like I was finally getting somewhere. Professionally, I was gaining traction. But on the personal front, there were questions. Mike and I had drinks not long after I got back and he brought it up again. You sure about Celia? He asked. I remember a few bumps not that long ago. We talked it out and while I respected his input, he didn't know her like I did. Or at least that's what I told myself. I want you to be my best man, I told him that night. I'm proposing in Kauai. We toasted with a couple shots of tequila, laughed about old stories and ended the night on a high note. 2 weeks later, I was headed back to Denver again. This time with more confidence, more samples in hand and a little more clarity. I thought I had it all figured out. Celia looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Like something out of a dream. But underneath that, I wasn't so sure anymore. That trip to Kauai. Man, it was something out of a dream. One night, we were walking along the beach, the sound of the waves rolling in, the warm breeze wrapping around us. I was so drawn to her in that moment, we almost got carried away right there on the sand. If it hadn't been for the few scattered people still lingering nearby, we might have gone all the way. But we held back, and more than made up for it once we got back to the hotel room. It was the second to last night of the trip. We were sitting together on our balcony, drinks in hand, watching the sun drop below the horizon. Everything about that evening felt right, calm, romantic, full of promise. I reached into my bag, pulled out the ring and turned to her. Celia, I said, will you marry me? She stared at the ring, her eyes welling up. Then she lunged into my arms, holding me tight and nodding. Yes, she whispered through tears. We ended up back in bed, caught up in that overwhelming feeling of love and possibility. Lying there afterward, wrapped in the sheets, I looked over at her. You happy? I asked softly. I am, she said, her voice still quiet. If you could change anything in our lives right now, I asked, what would it be? She was quiet for a few seconds, then said, nothing. I believed her. By November, my next work trip lined up with a week Ted had planned to host Junior, our customer from Southern California, who was coming in to check out our operation. I'd be out of town for it, but Ted said he'd be glad to give Junior the full tour while I was away. I was flying out to Montana for a trade show, one I was actually excited for. It was a great opportunity to break into a new market and get our products in front of more eyes. The show setup was Friday morning with opening night that evening, and an all-day run on Saturday. My flight home was scheduled early Sunday out of Billings. Knowing there'd be some after-hours networking and drinking, I took an Uber from my hotel. The show was going great. And later that night, after a few drinks, I found myself chatting with Junior. We were swapping stories, laughing, and I pulled out my phone to show him a few pictures from the Hawaii trip. When I swiped to a shot of Celia, smiling, standing barefoot on the beach, he leaned in. "Wait, let me see that again," he said. I held the phone out. "Yeah, that's Celia, my fiancée." Junior's expression changed. He looked a little too serious. "Does she know someone named Brandy?" he asked, eyes narrowing. I paused. "Yeah, she does." "Why?" He looked at the photo again. "I could be wrong, man, but I swear I've seen her with Brandy. Here. Like in this town. A couple weeks ago." That stuck with me. The way he said it. The way he handed my phone back, then took it again to double-check. It wasn't casual. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But still, that conversation lingered in my mind all the way back to the hotel. The flight home felt longer than usual. My head was spinning with questions I didn't want to ask out loud. By the time I landed, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to accuse her of anything, not right away. I just wanted to see if she'd lie to me. When I walked through the front door, she greeted me with a warm hug and a kiss. Everything looked normal. The kitchen remodel was coming along, and she gave me a quick tour of the progress like nothing was off. Then I looked at her. "I've got a question," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled, oblivious. "Sure, honey. What is it?" "When I was stuck in Montana at the trade show last month, what did you do that Friday night?" She blinked, then looked away for just a second too long. "Nothing," she said, brushing a hair from her face. "Just stayed in. Hung out here." I didn't flinch. I just stared at her. "You sure?" I asked. "You've got one last chance." She didn't respond. Just stood there. And that silence? It told me everything. From that moment on, things were tense. The rest of the week was a blur of awkwardness, quiet standoffs, and teary apologies. Celia was either crying or saying sorry, and I didn't know which was worse. I still loved her. That part hadn't changed. But I was also angry, confused, and unsure if I could trust her again. I needed someone to talk to. Someone outside of all the noise. So I called Mike. He listened. He didn't say much at first, just let me get it all out. Then he said, "Come over Friday night. We'll figure it out." I didn't know where things were going next. But I knew something had to change. The truth was, I didn't trust her. And that question started to haunt me. Can there really be love without trust? That Friday, I drove over to Mike and Megan's new place up in the South Hills. It was sleek, modern, the kind of home that looks like it belongs in a magazine. I gave them the full rundown, everything that had been happening with Celia, the incident in Montana, the tension, the lies. I needed perspective. I needed honesty. Mike didn't hold back. "If you can't trust someone you're sharing your life with, what do you really have?" he said. It hit me hard. At the same time, nothing in Celia's behavior since then had raised alarms. She was warm, affectionate, almost more than before. For my January business trip, she took the entire week off and came with me. We spent the weekend in Boulder. It was snowing, quiet, beautiful. We laughed, we relaxed, and for a while I let my guard down. The whole "dust up," as I started calling it in my head, began to fade from memory. And then, just like that, we got married. It was February. Small, intimate ceremony. Fewer than 100 people. Close family, the Robinsons, and a handful of friends. I met her mom, who was kind and soft-spoken, and a few relatives I hadn't known about. Notably, none of her club friends were there. Just Brandy. Honestly, it was a beautiful day. The kind that makes you believe maybe everything's going to be okay after all. But then work took a hit. A competitor had released a new engineered product. Looked eerily similar to ours but came in at a price point that was about 30% lower. Sales, which had been climbing steadily for months, started to dip. And fast. We'd already invested heavily in equipment and manpower to meet our previous demand, so now we were staring down the first signs of a real downturn. Ted, Kimberly, and I sat down to hash out a plan. Ted was calm, measured. He believed in the quality of what we made. "The best approach," he said, "is to get in front of our clients. Show them what sets us apart. They'll see the difference." He was right. But it still kept me up at night. Amid all that stress, Celia had been surprisingly supportive. She'd ask me about work, genuinely curious about how things were going. One night we went out for dinner, just the two of us. Great food, a bottle of wine, a few after-dinner drinks. It felt like we were finally finding our rhythm again. I thought to myself, tonight might end well. We called an Uber and stepped outside the restaurant to wait. I excused myself for a moment to use the restroom. When I came back out, the night shifted again. Marcus. Bobby. A couple of the others from that club scene she used to run with. They were circled around her like bees to a flower. She was laughing, smiling, and then I saw it. Marcus had his arm draped casually around her waist. Like he belonged there. I walked straight over. Without a word, I reached for his wrist and moved his hand off her. He flinched, maybe startled, and as he stepped back, his elbow clipped the side of my jaw. Not hard, but enough to make me pause. There was a second, just one, where I wanted to react. But I didn't. I took a breath, turned, and walked back inside the restaurant. Found an empty table, sat down, and ordered a brandy. By the second glass I had calmed down. I just sat there thinking. Despite everything, the disappointments, the surprises, I loved my job. Even with the new competition, it was a career I believed in. I had a future there. My bond with the Robinsons was still strong. Ted wasn't just my boss anymore, he was a mentor, even a father figure. Kimberly and I? We'd always remained friendly even after the divorce. We had a shared history and I respected her. And Mike was still my best friend. But Celia? That night made something crack open inside me. And once trust breaks, it's hard to repair. I really loved my house. There was something deeply satisfying about shaping it into what I saw as my version of a perfect home. Maybe it was because, growing up, housing never felt stable. We moved a lot. Rentals, short-term leases, shared spaces with relatives, and I think that lack of permanence stuck with me. So owning my own place? It wasn't just about the roof and walls. It was about finally having something solid. Something mine. That same need for stability carried over into how I handled my work. I wasn't just selling wood. I was selling relationships, trust, reliability, service. And even though we were up against cheaper products from a new Asian competitor, we were holding our ground with a surprisingly loyal customer base. A lot of them stuck with us not just because of quality but because of the way we treated them. And then came the curveball. Reports started coming in about defects in the competitor's material. Suddenly the cracks, literally, were beginning to show. Our clients were noticing and it helped swing some momentum back our way. I felt proud of how we'd handled the situation. We didn't panic. We leaned on what we did best, honesty and craftsmanship. That Tuesday night, I grabbed dinner with Junior Longfellow. He and I had developed a solid friendship and I trusted him. So over a couple beers I told him the whole story, about Celia, the lies, the tension, everything that had been building up. He leaned back in his chair then said, "Look, we don't really need you at the show this weekend. We're co-sponsoring it, sure, but it's not make or break. Maybe take the time off. Clear your head." I appreciated it, but I didn't realize just how much I'd need that time. Because the real blow came not long after. I walked into my house, our house, and there he was, Marcus, standing in my living room like he owned the place. Calm, smug, like this was perfectly normal. My pulse spiked. He had this half smile on his face and I completely lost it. "Get the hell out of here," I roared. He held his hands up like I was overreacting. "Chill, man. I'll be gone in a second. But you should understand, this lady here? She owns half the house." I stared at him, then at Celia, waiting for her to say something, anything. And she did. "We're married," she said flatly. "It's my house too." I was seething. Completely stunned. I could feel something dark building in my chest. If I stayed 1 second longer, I was going to do something I'd regret. "You've got 2 minutes, I said, pointing at Marcus. "Then I want you out of here." And with that I walked out. Didn't say another word. I went back into the main house and immediately called Mike. I was shaking not from fear, just the weight of it all. Mike, calm as always, said he'd make some calls. He didn't ask a bunch of questions. He just listened. That alone meant more than I can say. But I was in shock. Not just about the betrayal, though that was crushing, but about what it all meant. Celia was legally entitled to half the value of the home. And worse, she could claim half my equity in specialty timbers too. The entire foundation of my life suddenly felt like it was built on sand. I called Mike again the next day and explained what Darren King, my attorney, had told me. About the 50-50 split. About how bad this could get. Mike just paused for a moment, then said, "Don't worry about that for now. Just take care of yourself first. We'll figure the rest out. I might be able to help." For a second I actually felt a little lighter. Like maybe there was still a way forward. But deep down I couldn't help thinking, what could Mike really do? The law is the law. And no matter how good your friends are, some damage can't be undone. Still, a small part of me held on to hope. Maybe not for the marriage. That part was already over. But for myself, for whatever came next. I always knew Celia was a bit of a flirt. That part of her personality had been there from the start. The way she carried herself, the way she'd lean into attention at those dance clubs, the way her smile lingered just a little too long sometimes. At first I chalked it up to charm. Something playful. But in hindsight, it was more than that. She liked being the center of male attention. She needed it. And here I was trying to build a life with her. Sad, nervous, angry. It all just swirled together into this dull ache in my chest that I couldn't get rid of. If there was any silver lining during that storm, it was that work was back on track. Sales had bounced back strong and we were starting to look forward again. We'd begun eyeing Southern California as our next big opportunity, and even had early conversations about entering the Texas market. We were getting real interest from folks in those areas, and for the first time in a while, it felt like the future was full of potential, at least in that part of my life. Then one night I pulled into the driveway and noticed something off. A dark sedan was parked a little ways down the street. Tinted windows, engine idling. I could have sworn it was the same car I'd seen parked outside my place a few days earlier. I stared at it for a minute. It drove off before I could get a good look. Paranoia? Maybe. But I'd learned to stop ignoring gut feelings. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a conference room, preparing for the meeting I'd been dreading. On our side of the table, Darren, my attorney, Mike, solid as ever, and a third man I didn't recognize, probably another legal consultant. Across from us sat Celia's attorney, Rick Blassingame, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Celia was beside him, still striking despite the weight of everything. And to my absolute disbelief, Marcus was there too, sitting back in his chair, smirking like he had front row seats to a comedy show. There were no greetings. No handshakes. Just cold air and tighter jaws. Darren leaned in and said firmly, "All right, Mr. Blassingame. It's your meeting. Let's hear it." Blassingame cleared his throat. "Mrs. Joseph is simply seeking what is lawfully due to her after your client." Darren didn't flinch. His tone dropped several degrees colder. "You say one more word in that direction and you'll be removed. Personally. By me." The room froze. Marcus laughed under his breath, just enough to make it known. Then Darren stood up halfway and stared him down. That was all it took. Marcus stood, shot Celia a look and stormed out, slamming the door behind him like a petulant kid. Celia stayed seated. She was crying now. Not loud, not performative, just silent tears, steady as a leaking faucet. She didn't say a word. The silence hung in the air for a long beat. Then Darren turned to Blassingame again. "Mr. Devier has reviewed all the financial records, every last document. They've been certified and endorsed by the Attorney General's Office of the State of Oregon. If your client wishes to push this further, she's welcome to try. But let me give you a word of advice, it's going to cost her. A lot." That took the wind out of the room. Blassingame leaned back slightly, hands clasped in front of him, thinking. He was ready to talk now, probably for the first real time in the whole process. And me? I was just trying to hold myself together, watching the last pieces of a life I once thought was solid slowly get sorted into piles. What stays, what goes, what costs more than it's worth. We returned to the conference room and quietly took our seats. Tension still hung in the air like smoke. Darren leaned forward and spoke with the same even tone he always used when things were about to get serious. "All right, Mr. Blassingame," he said. "What have you and your client decided?" Blassingame adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. King, it's not so straightforward. While Mr. Joseph may not legally co-own the house, Mrs. Joseph spent a considerable amount of time working on it, repairs, upkeep. And during his business travels, she was the one maintaining the property." He paused for effect, but Darren gave him a small nod to go on. "We believe $50,000 is a fair figure," Blassingame added, in recognition of her contributions. I sat there stunned. $50,000? For repainting a hallway and calling the plumber twice? But just as the conversation turned toward details, things took a sharp turn into the unreal. I heard voices, 3 of them, coming from the hallway. The door flung open and there he was again. Marcus. But this time he wasn't smirking. He was holding a knife. "Well, well, well," he sneered, stepping into the room like he owned it. "Look what we have here." My heart was pounding. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, trying to sound calm but feeling anything but. He grinned, stepping closer. "What do I want? Maybe a piece of you. A few fingers. A hand, perhaps. Or maybe something else." I started looking around, any door, any window, any chance to get out, but before I could move, 2 guys who had come in behind him grabbed me by the arms. "This is gonna be fun," Marcus chuckled. But before anything else could happen, we heard shouting from the back near the cottage entrance. And then everything flipped. "John. Nathan. Bah. And 3 of their friends came charging in like something out of a movie. In a matter of seconds it was over. Marcus and his guys were outnumbered and overwhelmed. They bolted just as quickly as they'd come. After the dust settled, I pulled John aside and thanked him. He just nodded and said, "We look out for each other." Through my friendship with John and Nathan, I eventually got to know Van's sister. Her name? Jelly. Yeah, you heard that right. When I asked her where the name came from, she laughed and said, "My mom saw me when I was born and said, 'That's Jelly.' And it stuck." She's a fitness instructor at the Valley Club. Fit, confident, always on the move. I'm nearly 10 years older than her, but it's never seemed to bother her. Truth is, she's never once made me feel like that gap mattered. She also knows I'm not exactly eager to walk down the aisle again. And she respects that. One day she looked at me half smiling and said, "You still look at other women." I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to. Because what she said next stuck with me. "But I know when you look at me it's different."